U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is now postponing his trip to Egypt and Israel until mid-January. Is the delay a result of the tax cut vote or the widespread protests against the U.S. across the region? Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital has stirred global condemnation and sparked angry protests across Arab and Muslim countries. Will we see further division in the international community? Russian President Vladimir Putin declared victory on his visit to Syria, Egypt and Turkey, where he celebrated Moscow's deepening ties with key regional powers. Where does Russia stand in the Middle East turmoil? Clashes rose to a new level amid a fresh wave of violence across the West Bank and along Gaza's border, while the Palestinian president called on the UN to replace the US as mediator in the peace process. What is the way forward for the long overdue progress towards peace in the region?
U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has again delayed his visit to Egypt and Israel, which was scheduled for Tuesday. It is now postponed until next month. Palestinian leaders refused to meet with Pence after U.S. President Donald Trump last week recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Many countries also warned that Trump's decision will deepen tension and create more violence and chaos in the region. What's next for Israel and Palestine after Trump's Jerusalem move? Why has he gone ahead with this decision despite so much advice to the contrary? And how will his Middle East policy affect the region as a whole? To discuss these issues and more in the first part of today's program, I'm joined in the studio by Anna Tangen, author and columnist, and Tom McGregor, freelance reporter. Mayor Jeb Danfar, Middle East analyst in Israel, will join us through a satellite crossover. In the second half, we shall have Professor Graham Allison, director of Harvard's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue. And do you think the decision to postpone the visit to Middle East by Mike Pence is actually based on a lot of calculations and considerations instead of just the alleged tax reform back at home?
Well, I think it's a question of not going where you're not welcome. And at this point, given what's happened in the UN, it's very clear that the rest of the world is on one side of this issue and the United States is on the other.
And your take?
Well, my take, first of all, is there's a delay because it's necessary. We have tax reform legislation going through, so Mike Pence needs to be around just in case he needs their vote. But in regards to the Israel visit, this is going to be an amazing trip by Mike Pence. Israel is very excited to meet him, and this is going to be a great opportunity for Pence and Trump to reaffirm their decision to support Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Mayor, what are your thoughts on the postpone of the visit by Mike Pence? Do you think this is a result of the tax reform or an attempt to avoid fueling the tensions in the Middle East?
It's difficult to know, but probably because of the tax reform. But he'll be here because the issue of Israel is very important to the evangelical voters. Let me just cite some important numbers for you. In the 2016 elections in America, 26% of all voters defined themselves as evangelicals. Something like 45% of all Republican voters are evangelicals, and 64% of evangelicals voters believe that Israel is one of the top 3 issues. This is an issue that no party, especially the Republican Party, can ignore for its own survival in U.S. politics. Mr. Pence will be back here very soon.
Despite the fact that the Middle East process has actually ground to a halt, Americans seem to have lost its credibility as a neutral player to broker the Middle East. Arabs no longer trust the Americans. If you look at the track record of the previous administrations, Bill Clinton, Bush, Obama, they've all said Americans should relocate embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but none of them have actually honored the campaign promises, except for Donald Trump.
Yes.
So what do you think of the issue of credibility for the American government
First, it's a great thing. I mean, Trump is keeping his promises. I mean, it's always funny to watch some of his critics. Oh my God, Trump is keeping another promise. To me, it's laughable that these people are upset that President Trump is keeping another promise. The fact is, he promised he was going to move the embassy over to Jerusalem, and he's doing it now. So the fact remains is, what we see here is Trump basically keeping his promises, and that also maintains his credibility, not only with his supporters, but those who are watching him, other countries. They're seeing him keep his promises.
But there's absolutely no benefit. What's the benefit to the United States of causing this? Are we going to get a plan to the Middle East peace?
Okay, wait a minute. Israel is a very strong supporter of the United States. They've always been a strong supporter of the United States.
They get $5 billion
They're very excited
about
Pence coming to Israel. If they were very upset,
Tom,
they would never...
Are you a Jew?
No, I am not Jewish. I am not Jewish.
It doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not.
But
the issue is, what is the relationship between the U.S. and Israel?
It's a very strong relationship.
And is this going to further that?
It will
have a
deepen the
situation where they're deepen a relationship?
It will make it amazing and wonderful. Right now, Israel is one of the strongest. Israel is one of the strongest supporters of America.
You have a situation where you have a country of 5 million Jews.
You guys are just very upset. You folks are very upset because... I'm talking about people like you who disagree with this notion.
You mean the United Nations who
voted? First of all, if you want to address the United...
everyone against the U.S.?
Can I talk without being interrupted?
But the UN Security Council has decided and reached a consensus, except for the abstention of the United States, that this decision to take Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel is illegal. And what do you think of the opposition from the international community?
The United Nations and other countries have every right to say what they like. I am not stopping them from saying what they like. But the fact is, also America and Washington also have the right to make its own decision.
But the United States assumes the world leadership. If it's not respected at the UN Security Council for its unilateral action, what's going to happen next?
It still has its own sovereignty. It still can do whatever it wants. Whether or not people like it,
you mean the UN Security Council can be easily bypassed at the whims of the United States?
Why should we worry about what the United Nations thinks? I'm more worried about what President Trump thinks.
Both Europeans, the Russians, and the Chinese respect multilateralism, except for the United States, which doesn't respect the authority of the United Nations Security Council, does it?
In some instances, they support multilateralism because if they did not, they would have already walked away from the United Nations. We still have membership. We could have walked away from the United Nations. We haven't. The fact of the matter is, every country has a right.
So the U.S. has been very selective in using the UN Security Council.
And China can be selective.
Very selective.
Beijing can be selective. Moscow can be selective. Brussels can be selective. There is nothing wrong with that. Everyone has a right to make their own decisions.
Are you saying the UN Security Council is just a talking shop?
Apparently.
It doesn't have the authority to implement any decisions, any resolutions, except for talk.
And what happens if the UN Security Council does something that Beijing doesn't like?
Let me cross over to Mayor Jab Danfar. Hello. What do you think of the strong opposition from the UN Security Council, and the United States has abstained from the decision there?
Look, on the one hand, we in Israel are now in a minority. We have only the United States backing the government of Israel regarding this issue. So this means that, diplomatically it wasn't a wise move. But on the other hand, we've heard some things from, for example, from UNESCO. In May this year, they passed a resolution saying that the state of Jewish people, Israel, has no connection whatsoever to Jerusalem, and as you and I and all our friends in the studio know, that's also ridiculous because we have very strong historical ties to Jerusalem. So on the one hand, this move is controversial, it is diplomatically very costly, we are now in a minority and isolation, but on the other hand, some of the other agencies of the UN have acted in such a radical manner against Israel that it has in a way justified the moves by President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu at home by people who believe that some of the agencies of the United Nations are completely biased against anything to do with the state of Israel.
It's not just Muslims and Arabs. It's your allies and semi-allies in the Middle East who are united in their crusade against the U.S. decision to accept Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. For example, Saudi Arabia's Egypt, and even Turks have openly expressed their opposition to President Trump's decision. What do you make of the consequences?
Correct.
Mayor, what do you make of the consequences?
Diplomatically, it wasn't a wise decision. I mean, as I said again, this was a more to do with domestic reasons in America for President Trump. Diplomatically, it has been very costly. I wrote an op-ed for your website saying that it's been, you know, maybe right now is not the time to do it in terms of. You know, we see the demonstrations right now in Jerusalem. We see demonstrations in Gaza. We've seen now a huge conference by Turkey, which is very you know, took a very tough line against the state of Israel. So diplomatically, was not a wise move. But as with anywhere in the world, domestic politics trumps foreign policy. Domestic politics is always more important than foreign policy. And right now, for President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, domestic politics and getting more votes is important. Therefore, they support this move, despite the high diplomatic costs.
Anna, do you think when the credibility of the U.S. is very much at stake at this moment, Russia and China will take advantage of the vacuum and will exercise greater influence in facilitating the moribund peace process in the Middle East?
No, I don't think. I mean, it's a reason it's called the graveyard of empires. I don't know that it can be solved from outside. In the end, it must be solved internally. One of the only things that's propping up Israel is the United States. And if we were to withdraw our support, it would be the death knell for that particular
country. I wonder
if
you noticed something that happened quite a few years ago when the Quartet roadmap was formulated by Russia, the United States, and other parties. So Russia is one of the critical players in generating the roadmap for the peace process there. Tom, did you notice the role of Russians?
Sure, and I fully support Russia's role.
There is a formidable presence of Russian immigrants in Israel.
And I fully support Russia's role. If they want to play a stronger role in Syria, let them do it. Countries have a right to make their own decisions and how they handle their foreign policy and domestic issues. Of course, we should find ways to avoid war. But the fact of the matter is, if Russia wants to be more involved in Middle East policy, I would fully endorse it and support it.
What about having the intifada, the second of its kind, from Arabs? And Israel, which has been left marginalized by the growing sectarian violence between Shia and the Sunnis, will once again be brought back and get further involved in the chaotic Middle East peace process. Israel has been previously pretty happy for being marginalized because they don't want to be part of the sectarian violence between Persians and the Saudis. This time around, they are brought back again to the center stage of the chaos.
What I was struck by was something that Meyer said. That he said, look, we're not going to be brought in. What the UN has done has been against Israel. But I think you can turn that argument around. Right now, the rest of the world is looking on, and they're now seeing, all right, the Palestinians as the victims. And this will continue to wear away at Israel. The idea that Israel and the United States will stand together forever is not true. Nations act in their own self-interest. Oil is becoming less of an issue for the United States. And at some time in the future, there might be a president who believes that our interests lie elsewhere. This is why I believe it's necessary that they come to some sort of conclusion, peaceful, that allows them to...
Very quickly, let me cross over to Mayor Javdana for his thoughts on why President Obama refused to accept Netanyahu during his administration. Do you think, do you agree that Anna Tangen is correct? He said the national interests of Israel and the United States do not always see eye to eye, do not always fall into the same category, taking the Obama administration's refusal to treat Netanyahu nicely in the D.C. as an example. What do you think of the future?
To be honest with you, again, President Obama was acting to his home audience. 70% of American Jews vote Democrats, and many of them, despite being fervent and committed Israel supporters, they were exasperated by Netanyahu's anti-peace policies, which included also expanding settlements. You know, we were expanding settlements against the wishes of the United States while we were asking from the United States to back us diplomatically, to back us against Iran, and to back us in the United Nations. So some people were exasperated by that, and at the end Obama was driven to a point where he took his stance. This was our own making. I understand why our Prime Minister didn't agree with the President of the United States. That's the right of any Israeli Prime Minister. We're not an American puppet. But Netanyahu's behavior was so wrong and so counterproductive that it drove President Obama to what he's doing today. Also, let's not forget, Likud is like a Republican party. It's almost like a Tea Party. And the Democrats and the Republicans in America don't get on, so we couldn't expect also for them to get on when Obama was in charge. But now we have to think, we have to go forward with the peace process, but we have two stumbling blocks here. Number one is the issue of illegal settlements, and the other issue is that every time we in Israel have moved towards peace, there have been more Israelis killed through suicide bombings and rockets. So we need to reach that magic solution, that magic equilibrium where Palestinians can get their own state and we can have security. We have not reached that yet.
Thank you so much, Amir. Tom and Anna, thank you for being part of this dialogue in the first half of the program. We've been addressing the issue of both the Jerusalem status and why the expansion of Jewish settlements in the West Bank have also brought the peace process to the edge of disintegration. When we come back, we'll interview Professor Graham Allison, the professor who put forward the idea of Thucydides' trap facing the bilateral relationship between the United States and China. Stay with us, please. Joining us in the second half of the program is Professor Graham Allison, Director of the Harvard's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Welcome to Dialogue, sir.
Thank you for having me.
What do you make of the reasons behind Vice President Mike Pence's delay of his official visit to the Middle East, which will take him to two countries, Israel and Egypt?
Well, I think that there are lots of things going on at the same time, and it's becoming to be about time for Christmas, and so with the complexities, I think it's understandable. Yeah.
Official reason from the Trump administration is that he will be involved in the discussion on tax reform. Both Mohammed Abbas, the Palestinian authorities, and Hamas in the West Bank refused to meet with him. Hamas has been listed by the U.S. government as a terrorist organization, so do you think the decision by President Trump to accept Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel will cause a second intifada and more splashes from the Arabs?
It's possible, because I think that was a mistake, but I think that, back to your first question, all politics is local politics. Mm-hmm. That's one of the laws. So for Trump, objectives 1, 2, and 3 right now are getting through this tax reform bill, and Pence is pretty persuasive with a number of his House members. So I think even if there weren't all the other complexities, the domestic politics is a big piece of it.
Ever since the Obama administration, obviously Americans prefer to lead from behind and to lead by example instead of being involved in the graveyard of major powers in the Middle East. Do you think this is likely to change during the Trump administration?
I think we'll see even more so, because the American experience of leading from the front by fighting wars has not been very successful lately. If you look and see how have we done in Iraq, how have we done in Afghanistan, how have we done in Libya, how have we done in Syria, there's probably some reason why leading with our military in the first instance people are having reservations about.
Americans spend up to $800 billion on the war on Iraq itself, so it's very expensive.
Even more, right? If you take the full costing of it, it may be $3 or $4 trillion, and another $1 trillion for Afghanistan. So that's real money. Yeah.
What do you think of your policy on the Middle East? It can fall into several categories. First of all, your traditional alliance with Israel. But that may go wrong during the Obama administration, when the expansion of Jewish settlements in West Bank caused President Obama to be very angry, and he refused to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu when he was visiting the D.C. So do you think your friendship and alliance with Israel is likely to be reinforced or shaken during the Trump administration? Secondly, what do you think of the collective opposition from your Arab allies, such as Saudi Arabia, Turks, and Egypt, towards accepting Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
Well, very complicated questions. So basically, Obama and Bibi Netanyahu had a terrible relationship. They got off on the wrong foot. They didn't like each other. They didn't respect each other. Trump and Bibi have a great relationship. So strange world. Trump's recognition of Jerusalem, a big mistake in my view, but it's a big win for Bibi Netanyahu. So he feels like this is a plus for him. Actually, Trump's relationship with the Saudis is much tighter than their relationship with Obama, which is a strange, not with all the Saudis, but with the king and with the crown prince. But the policies that Trump is following are not necessarily compatible with the interests of the states.
Are you suggesting clearly that the Trump administration is very supportive of the domestic reform by the Crown Prince?
They've been backing the Crown Prince's whole reform program and betting their money that the Crown Prince is going to be successful, even encouraging him. And if you look at the Crown Prince's, say, the meeting that he held and the denunciation of Islamic extremism, it was something that Americans had been hoping for a long time. So there's something interesting under the surface there. Yeah.
And also the Trump administration supports the proxy war by taking side with the Saudis in fighting Persians in Yemen.
In Yemen, yes, absolutely.
And in Syria.
Yes. And in basically seeing Iran as the common adversary. So for Bibi, Iran is the big danger. For Saudi, Iran is the big danger. And to some extent for Trump.
You know, Professor Allison, it's no easy job to be world leader, whatever the circumstances. For example, the American credibility as the broker in the Middle East peace process has been seriously compromised due to this recent decision by Trump to relocate American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Then who will be the driving force and who will serve to put all parties together in facilitating the moribund peace process?
I think, unfortunately, we will see that there's nobody. And
nobody?
You could see this in Obama's analysis of the Middle East. The situation is such a mess that nobody can be the manager of all of the elements of it. He was pretty pessimistic about the prospect that American interventions, even trying to make things better, would be able to do so. So that I think accounted for a lot of his reluctance. In Trump's case, I don't think we even have a picture of what we might hope to accomplish. So we've aligned with the Saudis, we've aligned with the Israelis, we're aligned against the Iranians. But if you look at it, the Iranians and the Russians have done a better job in Syria of getting what they want than we have. If you look at Libya, it's a mess. If you look at Yemen, where we've backed the Saudis in a war that's gone nowhere. So I think that it's a mess, and unfortunately the Middle East is one of those places where things get worse before they get worse.
Don't you think the decision by Trump to accept Jerusalem as the legitimate capital of Israel is exceptionally surprising when the U.S. government decides to pull out of most of the multilateral frameworks and commitments, climate change, TPP, you name it. And therefore, do you think this is a U-turn? This is a game changer? This is what?
Unfortunately, and for better or worse, this is Trump being Trump. In the campaign, he said, I'm going to do this. The Israeli community in the U.S. has been eager for doing this. Congress has been voting for doing this. It's only been sensible presidents, both Republicans and Democrats.
How important is the domestic support of Christian evangelicals for the presidency of Donald Trump?
Quite important.
Quite important.
Quite
Why?
important, and they are also rabid about Israel about Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Again, a mistake in my view. What should have happened, and always the hope had been, that would be part of the settlement when we get to the point of a settlement that has been elusive for all these many, many years. And I think to play that card in advance was a mistake.
What do you make of the general picture of America being the world leader with the rise of China you look at the release of the National Security White Paper by the Trump administration, taking China and Russia as strategic competitors. For the first time, China has been listed together with Moscow. We have become your strategic competitor. What does that mean for the future of the bilateral relationship, the most consequential one in the 21st century?
That's what I've been here for 4 days talking about.
In Beijing.
Yes, in Beijing.
You're the guy who put forward the discourse of Thucydides.
Well, I think that Thucydides had this idea. China is, in fact, a powerfully rising power. The U.S. has been the ruling power. When a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, in general, historically, bad things happen. The majority of the cases, even war. So why does Xi Jinping say we need to have a new form of great power relations? What's wrong with the old form? What's wrong with the old form is that business as usual, that's old form, produces history as usual, and history as usual in things like this turn out to be catastrophic. So the challenge in this set of circumstances is not to simply fall into the Thucydidean pattern, but to reach and stretch beyond it. And I think if you look, the 19th Party Congress work plan, which was extremely impressive, looks very much like the rising powers game plan. And the national security strategy that Trump unveiled yesterday or the day before looks very much like the ruling powers game plan. So neither of those look to me like they're stretching beyond business as usual, neither of them constructing this new form of great power relations. So I think actually that's a challenge to everybody's imagination to say, what does that actually mean? How could we give content to it?
Are you optimistic about the peaceful role that China might play around the world? For example, taking the Middle East as an example, Russia was involved in the formulation of the Quartet roadmap, namely a recognition of the two independent states, Israel and Palestine, shoulder to shoulder. China has been also involved in the peace process because we are friends of all parties, like the 22-member Arab League, Israel, you name it. So do you think the retreat of the U.S. from the Middle East means automatically China's proactive participation as a brand new broker? We've been pretty reluctant, by the way. We are not very actively involved. We don't want to offend the Arabs.
China's been way underplaying its role, I think. I think China could play a very important role right now in the Korean situation, which is extremely dangerous. But I think similarly in the Middle East, China is a very influential country. China is a country that many of the countries look up to. China has powerful economic relationships with the countries. So it could play a more active role, and I suspect that we're going to see it playing a more active role.
The Belt and Road Initiative, do you think, should be viewed as economic invasion as described by the White House in the latest white paper on their strategic outlook?
No, the economic invasion will continue in any case because China's economy will continue growing. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for being with us on this very sensitive issue of the Middle East, which I believe will continue to be more volatile in the years ahead. Thank you, Professor Ellison, for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.